Okay, 3 weeks ago, we started a new series entitled 4 Destructive Habits of Highly Dysfunctional People. How many of you have been here for at least one of those? A pretty self-explanatory message title. I have a really cool image I put together for it somewhere. Wait for it. Wait for it. Okay, we're not going to wait any longer. It'll show up eventually. But we're really proud of the name because, it's like the book and the 4 Destructive Habits of the Highly. You know what I'm talking about. But again, the name's pretty, there it is. It's smaller than I imagined. Anyway, self-explanatory name. We've been looking at destructive habits that a lot of people who live highly dysfunctional lives tend to have with them. So the first week we looked at an unmanaged tongue. It's basically the idea that the things we say have a lot of power. We have the ability to destroy and we have the ability to build up. And if we don't watch it, we're going to destroy a lot. So we need to manage our tongues. Second week, we looked at being obsessed with feeling good, which is, it's the American way. And the problem there is if pleasure and feeling good is your priority, everything else suffers as a result. And things do suffer in our lives because we care about feeling good more than anything else. Last week, we looked at bitterness and unforgiveness and how just allowing a seed of bitterness and unforgiveness to linger in our lives can literally shape the whole course of our character and a lot of our choices. And this week, we are looking at the 4th and final destructive habit of highly dysfunctional people. We're finishing this morning, and we're looking at discontentment. Discontentment. But before we go any further with this, I want to take a moment to just define what we're talking about when I say discontentment, so we're all on the same page here. Discontentment is roughly, I guess you could say it's really similar to the idea of dissatisfaction. It's basically saying, or it's looking at your life and saying, I'm not going to be happy with the way things are. I'm not going to be happy with my state of affairs, with where my life is at right now. That's discontentment. It's viewing what you have in front of you as being not good enough, as being lesser than something else. Or restlessness. How about that idea? It's looking at your life and saying, there must be something else. Saying, if only this would change. If life would be so much better, if only this. It's never being satisfied with where you're at. That's discontentment, and that's what we're talking about this morning. Discontentment, it has a way of getting in one area of your life, like I'm discontent with this part, and then it kind of spreads to other areas until, have you ever met a person that's just thoroughly discontent? They're not happy with anything. Do they have anything to be happy about? Discontentment does that. And but really, realistically, it's kind of the American way. To be discontent. Like, who is content as an American? We talked about materialism recently, and we talked about, again, like I said, the obsession with feeling good, both of which are that's what we do in America. We seek after material goods. We're obsessed with feeling good. This whole idea of being discontent is very tied in with those ideas. We're never happy with what we have. I got to get more. This isn't good enough. I got to have something else. And really, in America, we're discontent about there's all kinds of things. You can be discontent about pretty much anything. Jobs. How many of us are discontent with our job? I am. I've been in the job market for months now, and I can't find anything. I'm just kidding. I work here. That was a joke. I was really scared that would fall flat and be like, oh, he doesn't like us. He wants to leave. I love my job. I'm not discontent with my job. But we're discontent with our jobs in America. We're discontent with our families. We're discontent with our money, right? Our financial state. That's a big one. Who's content with their financial state? We're discontent with our homes, our places of living. Discontent with our clothes, discontent with our cars. You can just keep naming it off. In America, you're discontent about everything, and then you get the next big thing, and then there's something else. There's always a bigger fish. That's America. We're discontent about stuff. And I think our culture teaches us to do this. It's not even like, it's a bad habit. Our culture teaches us to be looking for things to be unhappy with. Really? We look for things, okay, well, this isn't good enough. That's not good enough. Well, this could be way better. And often it boils down to what you're, specifically like what you're looking at and what you're comparing it to. Comparisons is a big thing with discontentment. His clothes are way nicer than mine. Her house is way bigger. His car is like 10 years newer. And on and on and on. We always look at things in our life and go, wow, yeah, it's not good enough. Not good enough. And it becomes a habit. And like I said, it really gets to the point we get discontent about one thing, we allow this discontentment to linger for a while, and then it starts spreading to one area, to another area. And again, we risk becoming thoroughly discontent people, and those people are just miserable. They just are. Discontentment isn't a happy state, by definition. And so it is a very, very destructive habit to allow discontentment to become a thing in your life. And here's the message title popping up. But oftentimes when you find somebody who lives a highly dysfunctional life, you'll find somebody who is thoroughly discontent in every area of their lives and who will never be content no matter what happens. We're going to, in just a second here, we're going to take a look at why discontentment is a bad habit, like the reasons it's a bad thing. But I do want to make a quick point before we move on. There is such a thing as legitimate discontentment. There's such a thing as good discontentment. There are things that you should be discontent with. You should be discontent with sin habits in your life. You should be discontent with how you treat your spouse if you treat your spouse poorly. You should be discontent with your relationship with God if you're not walking closely with Him. There are things you should be discontent with, and those are good, and those always demand action. It's never okay to let discontentment sit. You always have to start fixing it if it needs to be fixed. But what I'm talking about this morning is our American discontentment. Our discontentment with everything, whether you should be discontent about it or not. Because we really are. We're discontent with everything. We're never okay. We're always restless. It's never good enough. So, that said, let's look into a couple things. I've basically broken down this into two categories here, two main points of why discontentment is a bad thing. Why it is a bad habit, why it's a destructive habit. So number one, discontentment spoils, that says spoil. Should say spoils. Wrong verb tense. Discontentment spoils everything. Discontentment infects everything, like I mentioned. Jesus and Paul use the illustration of yeast and a lump of dough. They said a little bit of yeast put in a lump of dough dramatically changes the dough. All it takes is just a little bit. And discontentment is literally just like this. We get in the habit of being discontent with things in our lives, looking at all the different things that we're not happy with, and it really starts rolling, and it finds its way into all these other areas in our lives. And again, thoroughly discontent person is the only way I can think of to say it, because I've known a good few of those. They're not good to be around. There's nothing worthwhile in their lives. I have nothing to be thankful for. I have nothing to be grateful for. My life is the worst. It's because discontentment, this kind of discontentment, blinds you from what's really around you. It literally distorts your perception of reality. So again, with the whole idea of thoroughly discontent people, how many of you have known someone kind of like that? Someone they're just discontent. Stamp that on their foreheads because that's what they are. For those kind of people, they sit and they say, there is not a single thing I have in my life to be happy about. Nothing in my life is good. For people like that, and for people who know people like that, those who have like an outside perspective on people like that, they could be like, well, there's this, and there's this, and this, and this. I can see right off the bat a lot of things you have to be thankful for. Right? But the person who is thoroughly discontent, the person who has allowed discontentment to become a habit in their lives, they can't see it. Because all they see are these areas they should be unhappy with. There's two sides to any coin, and all they see is the negative side. Always, always, always. Never happy, never content with what they have, never thankful, never grateful. Discontentment as a habit distorts your reality. It blinds you to what you really have, what's really around you. And of course, with a distorted view of reality, your decisions are going to be rash and foolish oftentimes. If you don't really see what's happening around you, the truth of what's happening around you, your decisions are going to reflect that distortion, right? I've known people who have made just, people on the outside go, why in the world would you do that? Why would you do that? But for them, they're sitting in that, all they see is discontentment. I've got to get out of this. I've got to get out of this. Whether it's a job or a marriage or whatever it is, discontentment messes your perspective up so bad. Everyone outside is going, why? Why? Why would you be discontent with that? I was going to have a clip, but I decided not to show it. How many of you have seen Bruce Almighty? Really interesting movie, Jim Carrey. There's a scene, he's had a really bad day, and there's a scene where he comes home, and he got passed over for a promotion, and then he got mugged trying to help a homeless man who was being picked on. He just had a bad day. And Jennifer Aniston, his wife or whatever she is, she says, I'm just really glad you're okay. And so he'd been complaining and he's had a bad day. She says, I'm just glad you're okay. This could have been so much worse. And he says, okay? I'm not okay. He says, I'm not okay with a mediocre job. I'm not okay with a mediocre apartment. I'm not okay with a mediocre life. And so the viewer, we're sitting here watching the movie, we're going, his apartment's really nice. His apartment's way nicer than my apartment. He's healthy. He's got a beautiful wife person, Jennifer Aniston. He's got a good life. What's he so discontent with exactly? That's the thing with discontentment is when you're sitting there with your distortion colored, you can't see why you should be happy. There's not a single thing good in my life. And the outsider's sitting and going, yeah, there is. I can count 10 right now. That's how discontentment works. So that's number one. Discontentment spoils everything. It paints your perception of reality. Number two, discontentment can steal you away from what God wants to accomplish in your life right now. Because the thing with discontentment is you sit and you say, I'm not happy with where I'm at. I am not happy with where I'm at. My life would be so much better if only this. My life would be so much better if only this. And so many people who are always like, then my life will begin. Then my life will get started. Then I'll follow God's will for my life. Then things will be better. And looking for the if only constantly, they do not live the life that's in front of them right now. And that's huge, because here's the fact. Here's what's really cool. God has a plan for every single one of us where we're at right now. Not just if only I can get there, then God's will for me will start happening. Where we're at currently with our job, with our family, with our friends, in our city, in our home, with our car, with our abilities, whatever it is, God has a plan for us there. And it's possible to live that life, that exact sphere that we're in, abundantly and fully. I worked with Youth with a Mission for a few years. A missions organization that we'd bring students in and we'd train them, help them get close to God, and we'd take them out in the mission field and they would do ministry, and it was awesome. It's a great thing. But I knew a lot of students that would finish, they'd come back from their month-long mission trip in their school and they'd come back home. And then they'd have to have real responsibilities, with real life job, and go back into the real world, whatever that means. But they'd have to work a job, like a regular job, and they would get so depressed and messed up. Like, God, where are you? Why aren't you taking me out of this mediocrity? Like, bring me back into the ministry, God. Put me back into the ministry so I can do your will, God. As if the ministry is the only place that ministry should happen. I think that's one of the worst misconceptions in the church today, is that ministers are the ones that minister and nobody else. Because here's the thing. If people who worked in the ministry were the only ones that ministered, the world would be a very, very dark place, and we'd have these little orbs of light at the church and just darkness everywhere else. The fact is, God has a plan and wants to speak into every sphere in society, at every job, at every workplace, and every whatever. The ministers are just the ones who get to do it formally and help other people do ministry in their own lives. But as Christians, it's our responsibility in every sphere, with every job and family and whatever, to be doing God's will there. And so these former YWAM students who get so depressed, God, why? Please bring me back out into the ministry. If only I were there, then things would be better. If only I were there, then I'd be able to do your will. All the while not doing God's will in the place they were at, in the job they're at. Because God had a plan for them there. The large majority of them, God wanted them exactly where they were, doing exactly what they were doing. They were so consumed with, I've got to get out of here. If only I were somewhere else, then it'd be better. Because discontentment steals us away from what God wants to do right here and right now in our lives. Here. How many of you remember the "What Would Jesus Do" movement of the 90s? The bracelets. I used to wear like 5 of them when I was a kid. Multiple colors. I'm especially Christian today. 5 bracelets. It's a cool movement because it's the whole, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And then do what Jesus would do. But I really think that it would have been better served by, instead of WWJD, what would Jesus do if he were me? Would be a little bit more accurate. Because what Jesus did was, he went out and roamed the countryside and found some fishermen to follow him, and then he preached until he died. We're not supposed to do that. Most of us, maybe one of you or 2 of you are supposed to do exactly what Jesus did. But most of us aren't. The better question to ask is, what would Jesus do if he had my job, if he had my family, my car, my house, my mortgage payment? What would Jesus do if he were me? Because here's what's interesting. Think about it. If Jesus were you, were really like you in your exact situation, I almost guarantee he'd be living your life a whole lot better than you are. Exactly where you are. He'd be making way better decisions. He'd be a much brighter light. I know where I'm at right now, I can say that. I don't want it to be true, but it is right now. My goal is to get to where I am living my life exactly the way Jesus would if he were me. But we get so discontent with what's in front of us that we miss out on that completely. If only this, if only that, then I could start living. It's a very bad habit. It's a massive distraction. It's very destructive. The thing is, we make the mistake of believing that those people who seem to be content must have everything together. Like, well, he's happy. He's a really content, joyful person. He must have everything together. If only my life were so put together, then I could be content and joyful too. That's a lie. It is. Because the truth is, people who are content and joyful are in that state because they choose to look over all the things in their life they could be discontent about. Because here's the fact, and this is true. Everybody you meet has painful things in their life, has hard stuff in their life, hurtful things present in their lives. But the true art, I think, the true art of being able to live life is being able to see grace in every situation. It's being able to choose joy despite pain. It's being able to choose contentment despite our sleeves being tugged on by all these situations wanting to drag us down into discontentment. We all know of Helen Keller, right? She said this, and listen closely here. She said, "Everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence. And I learn, whatever state I may be in, therein to be content." We all know Helen Keller. And we say, if only my life, if only this, if only that, then I'd be happy. You think if anybody had a right to be discontent with their lives, it would be this woman, right? Deaf, blind. Can you imagine a life being deaf and blind? I can't. That would be misery. And yet she says everything has its wonders, even darkness and silence. And I learn, whatever state it may be in, therein to be content. And if there's anything that speaks more profoundly to what we're talking about this morning, it's got to be that. That's huge. That statement remind you of anything else? The Apostle Paul in Philippians chapter 4 said something really similar. He said, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And Paul was another one of those guys who, if anyone had the right to be discontent with their lives, he was one. Every kind of persecution you can imagine, he experienced it. Every kind of misfortune you can imagine, it happened to him. And yet he says, I've learned to be content in every situation. I've learned how to be brought low. I've learned how to be brought high. I've learned how to face hunger and plenty, abundance and need. You know something really similar about what both Helen Keller and Paul said? The word learn. They both said, I've learned to be content. In hunger and need, in darkness or silence, they've learned, whatever state they're in, to be content. And that's the thing. It can be learned. And it's really easy to throw out these cool principles. Hey, you should do this. And well, good luck figuring out how to do it. What if I told you to create a VCR? Build one from scratch. Okay, great. See you in 60 years when I, the messed up one. Who uses a VCR anymore anyway? It can be learned. Now here's the thing, it's something, it's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's as easy as snapping your fingers and bam, you're content. It isn't. Because I think a whole lot of us, I feel comfortable saying a whole lot of us live with habits of discontentment in our lives. But it can be learned. And here's the thing, we are always, always, always going to have some excuse to be discontent. Always. If you're waiting for the moment where there's nothing else, there's nothing in my way between me and perfect contentment, it's never going to happen. Maybe when you're dead. Who knows? I don't know what that looks like. But here, it's not going to happen. But you can learn to be content despite all those things, despite the stuff in your life. And I'm not talking about some fairy dust fantasy here. It's something that takes a lot of effort and self-discipline and strength, choosing contentment in the face of things that are painful and hurtful. But that, I think, that's the abundant life that Christ describes. Being able to be content and joyful in every situation. It sounds pretty cool. I think so. So briefly here, as we wrap things up, I'm going to give you some how-tos, some first steps. If you want to start learning how to be content in the face of all the things you have to be discontent about. If you want to start learning, I'm going to give you a couple short points. Number one, take time to appreciate what you really have. Realize what's around you and be thankful, be grateful, and be content with it. If you're at a place in your life where you honestly can't see a single thing to be content about, or you're having trouble seeing things to be happy with in your life, good things in your life, find someone who knows you and get the outsider perspective we talked about earlier. Say, hey, what do I have to be content about? What do I have to be happy about in my life? And I promise they're going to start pointing out stuff you didn't see. Getting that outsider perspective is huge. Or sit down by yourself long enough until you start to get a picture of that outside perspective of your own life. Whatever it is, realize what's around you. See what's around you, because I think sometimes we need that perspective. Sometimes we forget how much we have to be grateful for. I know I do. The thing with discontentment is it comes out of putting our focus on the things we have to be unhappy about. And that's where our focus is. The thoroughly discontent person overlooks everything they have to be grateful about and focuses only on the things they have to be unhappy and ungrateful for. We talked about the power of our focus and our thoughts in Christianity a couple months back. What you focus on, what you think on, what you dwell on in your mind causes a reaction in your emotions and can affect your emotions and your choices. This is the same basic concept. If you sit and you dwell on all the stuff you have to be unhappy about, you're going to be unhappy and you're going to be discontent. It's just the way it is. Of course, it's common sense. But there's two sides to every coin. And if you notice yourself starting to think on all that stuff, say, no, I'm going to flip this comparison around and I'm going to start appreciating what I do have. Got to put 4 new tires in your car all of a sudden? You have a car. That's more than a whole lot of people can say. It's really easy to flip the comparison around. There's always a positive side to everything. And that kind of sounds new agey, but occasionally you find some common sense floating around in the new age stuff. Like, hey, that's true. There's always a positive side. That's number one. Number two, remember what God has done in your life and is doing in your life. Because sometimes it's easy to forget that we have a God who's every bit as invested in our lives as we are. Remember what he's done and remember what he is doing, because remembering that dispels discontentment. It's really hard to be discontent when you remember that your God is involved in your life and he's doing things in your life. It worked for the Israelites for a time. Those two things right there, taking time to appreciate what you really have and remembering what God has done in your life. If you make a practice out of those things, you're going to start learning how to be content in the face of anything in your way. And that's a really cool place to be, I think. And I think it's a place that every single one of us, if given the chance, would love to be in. To be joyful regardless of the situation, to be content in the face of things to be discontent about. It sounds really cool to me. So we're going to have the band come up here as we close out. I'm just going to send out a quick prayer. If any of you want any more information or advice, like how do I start this, aside from what I also gave you, just feel free to come up and talk to me or any of our other leaders, because we love to help you. Because it's a big deal. It really is. It's so freeing and peaceful and really enabling to be free of discontent, to be content with where you're at in your life. So God, I know you want us to be able to live the abundant lives you created us for, abundant, full life, and discontentment is not a part of that. Dear Father, would you help us to learn to not focus on the things we could be unhappy about or displeased with? Would you help us to learn to appreciate what we have, to be grateful for what we have, to remember that you're involved in our lives? Because you've blessed, I know in my life, you've blessed me so much, God, and when I take time to remember it, it's any discontent seems petty and small in the face of all that. So would you help us to be able to learn how to do the same? We love you, Father. Amen.